When I first started with Nintendo 3DS Homebrew, one of the first things I was curious about was of course which emulators would run on it. NES, SNES and Game Boy make a lot of sense as they were already available as virtual console services. Then I saw Nintendo 64 and even PlayStation 1 on the list. PS1? Come on, that's absurd. It's probably only on here as a proof of concept. That would never work. So, logically, instead I tried the Nintendo 64 emulator and even made a video about it. In the end, I was rather disappointed by its performance. This is peak 3DS emulation, I thought. And then, out of boredom, I did eventually try running a PlayStation 1 game on it. And, oh boy, was I wrong about my first impression. Today, I want to show you 12 different PS1 games running on the new Nintendo 3DS and what RetroArch's PCSX ReARMed emulator is truly capable of. Starting off the list, we have Tomb Raider, and it runs! I'm playing a PS1 game on the 3DS. This feels so weird. During the 1 hour that I played Tomb Raider, the frame rate was surprisingly stable and I barely encountered any issues. There was only one frame drop, but other than that, it was a smooth experience. Although there are some rare frame drops, Ape Escape runs incredibly well. The most noticeable issue is that the voices can be a bit stuttery.
The time station has been activated by Spectre and you're being transported back in time.
And all other sounds are mostly fine. Something that's unique about Ape Escape in general is that it requires a DualShock controller to be playable. Thankfully, you can easily configure the type of controller in the RetroArch settings. And voila! This is also how you play PS1 games with the circle pad. The only trouble I ran into is the fact that the 3DS doesn't have an L3 and R3 button. So instead, I reassigned those to the up and down buttons on my D-pad. It's not ideal, but otherwise you can progress in the game. In Spyro, we have the opposite issue of Ape Escape. The voices are great,
but first let me tell you a story.
No thanks, see ya.
But other sounds have constant hiccups. Other than that, the game ran perfectly with no issues whatsoever, making for a truly nostalgic time. And now here's the ultimate stress test, Gran Turismo 2. At the time it was considered to look very realistic, and to this day it's one of the best looking PS1 games. As I played the game, there were many times where I encountered heavy frame drops and glitches. Some tracks in particular are completely unplayable. Usually it's just a small area on the track causing this, and looking backwards can sort of help with it. Both arcade mode and career mode work, but as you progress into the game, it's a question of time until you run into a roadblock. but it's still quite impressive that the 3DS can pull this off. Rayman 2 really stands out in terms of sound quality for its voices.
Tell me, do you know where to find the 4 masks of Polycus?
Sorry, Rayman, I don't know what you're talking about.
But unfortunately the music sometimes sounds like it's struggling to play. It runs well most of the time. Rayman 2 does however have frequent 2-second slowdowns. My assumption is that the game is loading something in the background. Other than that, it's perfectly playable. It's not exactly Hogwarts Legacy, but Hogwarts nonetheless.
Flipendo!
The performance in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is outstanding.
Wingardium Leviosa!
Playing it was a magical and smooth nostalgic experience.
Hello, Harry, it's me, Hagrid. Good to see you.
Outside of my recording session, I discovered that it can lag in very specific areas like the Great Hall, but it's definitely the exception and playable all the way through.
Blast you, Potter! Next time you won't be so lucky.
Here's the first game where I actually encountered a major issue. While trying to play Crash Team Racing, the game kept freezing on the loading screen. No matter whether I tried the adventure mode, time trial or battle, it wouldn't go further than the adventure hub. That was at least the European copy of the game. So later I tried the American version and that one finally worked. The overall performance is okay. Crash Team Racing has occasional slowdowns and stuttery sound. It's playable and I found it to be perfectly tolerable, but for a racing game frame drops are never ideal. It's nonetheless a cool way to experience the game. From racing we go to Crash's real origin. In Crash Bandicoot the performance is perfect. It's a great way to experience Crash dying over and over and over and over and over. An hour, of course, is nothing in the context of a humongous game like Final Fantasy VII. It did nonetheless leave me with a good first impression in terms of performance. Only during these kinds of scenes where the camera moves dramatically did I notice slowdowns. Other than that, it runs great. Just as its title suggests, Metal Gear Solid indeed has solid performance. The frame rate is smooth, the voices are incredibly crisp,
They say if they don't accede to their demands, they'll launch a nuclear weapon. Sweet Jesus. Is it possible?
and slowdowns are non-existent. It's actually perfect. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, our first and only 2D game on this list. Interestingly, also the game that had the most issues. There are frequent slowdowns. The voices and sounds are stuttery.
You steal men's souls and make them your slaves.
And texts are generally difficult to read on the 3DS. And I'm not sure if it's just me, but the game overall feels a tiny bit slower than usually. It's still playable, but easily the worst performing on this list. And I'm sure this setup is just asking for very frustrating moments during boss fights. Our last game is Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. Whether at night, during police chases, or against other racers. The gameplay is stable, smooth, and exactly what you'd expect from a racing game. Sadly, it did not help me with my driving skills, but it made for a very enjoyable time. Even after playing all these PS1 games, I can still not believe the fact that they not only run on the 3DS, but do so with such an impressive performance. On average, every game on the list had a great frame rate and all of them are perfectly playable with only some minor exceptions not being ideal. RetroArch's PCSX ReARMed emulator made the impossible possible. What a strange situation for the 3DS to be in, where PS1 games run significantly better than Nintendo 64 games. If you're interested in the Daedalus X64 emulator on the 3DS, I've made a video on that as well, so check it out to see just how stark the contrast really is. Either way, I'm generally positively surprised by this experience. I found myself playing Spyro and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for hours after recording this video. Therefore, if you have a new Nintendo 3DS with Homebrew, I can only recommend trying the PCSX ReARMed emulator, as it's definitely worth it. Feel free to subscribe to Small Thoughts if you like this video, and if you have any questions or video suggestions, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.